I accidentally discovered my parents, Richard and Linda, meeting with lawyer Harold Grayson in a coffee shop, whispering about having me declared mentally incompetent to seize my $2 million inheritance from my late grandfather. They planned to plant prescription psychiatric medications in my apartment and forge medical records showing erratic behavior. I realized they had been documenting my every move for months, building a false case. My own parents were preparing to destroy my life and steal everything my grandfather left me. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. That cold Tuesday afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about my family. After spotting them at the coffee shop, I decided to follow Richard and Linda from a safe distance, my heart pounding, as I watched the two people who raised me conspire against their own son. They drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town, and from my position behind a dumpster, I could see into their rented unit through a small window. What I witnessed made my blood run cold. Stacked boxes labeled with my name contained falsified medical reports bearing official letterheads, doctored photographs showing me looking disheveled and confused, and video recordings from hidden cameras they had secretly installed in my childhood bedroom during my recent visits home. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My mother's persistent invitations for family dinners weren't expressions of maternal love, but calculated opportunities to slip mild sedatives into my food. I remembered those evenings now with horrifying clarity. The way Linda would insist I eat her special lasagna, how she would refill my lemonade glass repeatedly, and the strange drowsiness that would overcome me afterward. I had attributed my fatigue and occasional memory lapses to work stress from my software engineering job, never suspecting that my own mother was systematically drugging me to capture footage of my impaired state. The elaborate deception ran deeper than I could have imagined. Linda had been posing as my concerned girlfriend to psychiatrist Dr. Margaret Thornton, spinning tales about my alleged paranoid delusions and threatening behavior. Richard had been forging my signature on fake medical consent forms, creating an extensive paper trail suggesting I had voluntarily sought psychiatric evaluation for concerning symptoms. Their conspiracy included my estranged Uncle Dale, who owed them $15,000 from a failed restaurant venture. Dale had agreed to testify about my supposed mental instability, believing their lies about my erratic behavior and threats against the family. They had manipulated him into thinking he was protecting everyone from my dangerous psychological condition. The scope of their plan became clear as I listened through the thin storage unit walls. They intended to have me involuntarily committed to Riverside Psychiatric Hospital within the week, during which time they would gain power of attorney and transfer my grandfather's entire trust fund into their names. The inheritance included not just the $2 million in cash and investments, but also my grandfather's historic house in Vermont, his collection of classic cars worth over $300,000, and valuable antique furniture he had collected throughout his lifetime. My grandfather had specifically left everything to me because he distrusted Richard's gambling problems and Linda's compulsive shopping addiction. He had witnessed their financial irresponsibility for years and wanted to ensure his life's savings would be protected. Now they were planning to steal every penny he had worked so hard to accumulate. The betrayal extended beyond money into the destruction of my relationships with extended family members. Richard and Linda had been spreading lies to cousins, aunts, and uncles, telling them I had been acting erratically and making concerning statements about harming myself. They had systematically poisoned my relationships to isolate me and make their fabricated story more believable to anyone who might question their actions. I discovered that several relatives had already agreed to support the competency hearing, genuinely believing they were helping save me from myself. My cousin Jennifer had been told I threatened to hurt myself during a phone call that never happened. My uncle Robert was convinced I had been drinking heavily and making wild accusations against the family. Every lie was carefully crafted to build their case while destroying my support system. The financial motivation became clearer as I continued my surveillance. Richard owed $75,000 to dangerous people from underground poker games, and Linda had accumulated over $60,000 in credit card debt from luxury shopping sprees. They had already spent money they expected to receive from my inheritance, taking out loans against the anticipated windfall that would soon be due. Their desperation had transformed into calculated cruelty. I listened as they discussed their excitement about finally accessing my grandfather's money, making callous comments about how they would divide the wealth. Richard talked about paying off his gambling debts and buying a new boat, while Linda planned expensive European vacations and designer shopping trips. Neither showed any remorse about destroying their son's life in the process. The storage unit contained evidence of months of preparation. They had been practicing conversations and rehearsing their testimony for the competency hearing. Linda had created a detailed fake diary documenting her growing concerns about my mental health, backdating entries to create the illusion of a gradual deterioration in my psychological state over several months. Dr. Thornton's involvement added a professional veneer to their scheme, but I learned she was actually Linda's former college roommate who had lost her medical license in another state for falsifying patient records. She was operating under a different name and was desperately broke, making her the perfect accomplice for $50,000 in cash. As I crouched behind that dumpster watching my parents plan my destruction, I felt something break inside me. The unconditional love and trust I had felt for them throughout my 28 years evaporated, replaced by a cold determination to protect myself and expose their crimes. They had taught me that family meant everything, but now they were showing me that money meant more than their own child's well-being. The evidence of their systematic surveillance shocked me most. They had been following me for months, documenting my every move, photographing me during vulnerable moments, and building a comprehensive case file designed to convince a judge that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. Every family interaction had been a performance, every expression of concern, a calculated manipulation. I realized that my recent breakup with my girlfriend Jessica wasn't the private matter I thought it was. My parents had been monitoring my personal life, planning to use my emotional vulnerability as additional evidence of my psychological instability. They knew about my work stress, my occasional drinks with friends, and every personal struggle I thought I was handling privately. The sophistication of their plan terrified me. They had anticipated potential obstacles and created contingency plans for every scenario. If I tried to fight the competency hearing, they had evidence of my paranoid delusions about family persecution. If I sought legal help, they had documentation of my inability to make rational decisions. Every possible defense I might mount had been preemptively undermined by their fabricated evidence. Standing in that parking lot surrounded by the normal sounds of suburban life, I understood that my childhood was officially over. The parents who had raised me, taught me right from wrong, and claimed to love me unconditionally were willing to destroy my entire future for money. The people who were supposed to protect me had become my greatest threat. The next morning, I knew I needed professional help to counter their sophisticated operation. I contacted private investigator Casey Richardson, a former police detective who specialized in family fraud cases. Casey's office was located in a nondescript building downtown, and her direct manner immediately put me at ease as I explained the unbelievable situation unfolding around me. Casey's investigation revealed that my parents had hired their own private investigator, Marcus Webb, who had been photographing me for 3 weeks. Webb had been following me to restaurants with friends, trying to capture images that suggested excessive drinking or erratic behavior. He had approached several of my coworkers at Tech Dynamics, asking leading questions about my mental state and job performance, hoping to gather testimonials supporting their incompetency claim. The depth of their surveillance shocked even Casey, who had seen numerous family fraud cases. They had installed keylogger software on my home computer, allowing them to read every email I sent and every website I visited. Linda had used her knowledge of my personal information to answer security questions and gain access to my bank accounts, monitoring my financial activity for evidence of reckless spending. My cybersecurity friend Mike Torres helped trace the digital intrusion, discovering that Linda had been systematically accessing my accounts for over 2 months. She had screenshots of my online banking, copies of my work emails, and records of my social media activity. They knew about my grocery purchases, my streaming subscriptions, and every aspect of my private digital life. The legal framework surrounding their scheme proved more complex than I initially understood. My grandfather's original lawyer, James Morrison, had been convinced that I was becoming dangerous and unpredictable. Richard had forged my signature on documents requesting psychiatric evaluation, and Linda had persuaded Morrison that I was too proud to admit I needed help. The elderly attorney, trusting their apparent concern for my welfare, had agreed to facilitate an emergency competency hearing. Dr. Thornton's fraudulent practice extended beyond my case. Operating under the name Dr. Margaret Thornton, instead of her real name Dr. Margaret Walsh, she had been providing fake psychiatric evaluations for families seeking to gain control over their relatives' assets. Her desperation for money, after losing her medical license in Colorado, made her the perfect accomplice for my parents' scheme. Casey discovered that Dr. Thornton had been creating backdated psychiatric reports for me, documenting months of fictional therapy sessions and medication adjustments. These fabricated records would serve as the foundation for her testimony that I was non-compliant with treatment and posed a danger to myself and others. She had prepared detailed psychological assessments filled with clinical terminology that would sound convincing to a judge unfamiliar with my actual mental state. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of my parents' desperation. Richard's gambling debts weren't just from casual poker games, but from high-stakes underground operations run by people who didn't hesitate to collect debts through violence. He had borrowed money from multiple sources, promising repayment once he gained access to my inheritance. His creditors were becoming increasingly impatient, making the timeline for their scheme critical to his physical safety. Linda's shopping addiction had spiraled completely out of control. Credit card statements showed purchases of designer handbags, worth thousands of dollars, jewelry she couldn't afford, and luxury items that now filled their house. She had maxed out multiple credit cards and taken cash advances against others, creating a web of debt that required immediate resolution to avoid bankruptcy. Uncle Dale's participation wasn't just about the money he owed them. My parents had convinced him that I had threatened to expose his tax evasion to the IRS unless he stayed away from family gatherings. Dale genuinely believed I had become vindictive and dangerous, making him willing to testify against me to protect the family from what he thought was my growing instability and potential for violence. The storage unit contained more evidence than I had initially observed. Hidden behind the boxes of fabricated documents, Casey found recording equipment they had used to practice their testimony and coaching materials to help Dale memorize his lies. They had created detailed timelines of my alleged erratic behavior, complete with dates, times, and witness statements they planned to present during the competency hearing. Marcus Webb's surveillance extended beyond simple photography. He had installed tracking devices on my car and had been monitoring my location 24 hours a day for weeks. His equipment included sophisticated audio recording devices that he used to capture my conversations in public places, hoping to record statements that could be taken out of context to support their case. The corruption in their scheme reached into the legal system itself. Richard had been working with court clerk Nancy Phillips, who owed him money from his illegal gambling operation. Phillips had agreed to expedite the competency hearing and ensure it was scheduled when I would have minimal time to arrange legal representation. She would manipulate the court calendar to stack the odds against me. Casey's background check on Nancy Phillips revealed a pattern of suspicious activity in competency hearings over the past 2 years. Multiple cases had been fast-tracked through the system, with minimal oversight suggesting that my parents weren't her first clients seeking to manipulate the legal process for financial gain. The psychological manipulation of family members proved particularly sophisticated. Linda had been gradually planting seeds of concern about my mental health during phone conversations with relatives mentioning small incidents that never happened and expressing worry about changes in my behavior that were completely fictional. She had been building their case for months, ensuring that multiple family members would be ready to support their claims when the time came. My parents had anticipated that I might discover their plan and had prepared countermeasures. They had documented my relationship with my grandfather, planning to claim that his influence over me had been inappropriate, and that his decision to leave me, everything was evidence of his own mental decline. They were prepared to challenge the will itself if their competency scheme failed. The investigation revealed that their planning extended beyond the immediate theft of my inheritance. They had researched methods for maintaining control over the money long term, including strategies for hiding assets and avoiding taxation on their sudden windfall. They had consulted with financial advisors about the best ways to quickly liquidate my grandfather's investments and property. Casey warned me that their timeline was accelerating. The competency hearing had been scheduled for the following Friday, giving them less than 2 weeks to complete their evidence planting and finalize their testimonies. Marcus Webb was preparing to submit his surveillance report, and Dr. Thornton was putting finishing touches on her fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. The scope of their betrayal became clear as Casey presented her findings. Every family interaction over the past 6 months had been a performance designed to gather evidence or manipulate my behavior. Every expression of parental concern had been calculated to build their case. Every family dinner had been an opportunity to drug my food and record my impaired responses. Understanding the full extent of their operation, I realized that a simple confrontation would be insufficient. They had prepared for the possibility that I might discover their plan and had backup strategies to discredit any accusations I might make. I needed irrefutable evidence that would expose not just their current scheme, but their entire pattern of criminal behavior. The counter-surveillance operation would require careful planning and flawless execution. Any mistake would allow them to claim I was paranoid and delusional, actually supporting their competency case. I had one chance to gather the evidence needed to destroy their scheme and protect myself from their calculated destruction of my life. Creating the perfect counter trap required meticulous planning that would make their criminal behavior undeniable. I developed an elaborate deception centered around a fake business trip to Seattle, designed to draw my parents into completing their scheme, while I gathered irrefutable evidence of their crimes. The digital deception proved most challenging because of their extensive monitoring of my electronic communications. I created authentic-looking email chains with fictional colleagues about a software development project for a major client in Seattle. Using my knowledge of corporate communication patterns, I crafted realistic messages about project timelines, budget approvals, and technical specifications that would appear legitimate to anyone monitoring my accounts. Mike Torres helped me create a sophisticated digital footprint that would convince my parents the trip was genuine. We generated fake hotel confirmations at the Grand Hyatt Seattle, fabricated airline reservations through Delta, and created detailed itineraries showing meetings with non-existent clients. Every document contained authentic-looking confirmation numbers and realistic pricing that matched actual travel costs. The coordination with my company's human resources department required careful explanation without revealing the true nature of my family crisis. I arranged 3 weeks of emergency leave citing a serious personal matter that required my immediate attention. My supervisor, understanding my typically reliable work performance, approved the time off without demanding detailed explanations. I booked real flights and hotel reservations using a secondary credit card my parents didn't know about, ensuring that any verification attempts would confirm the existence of my travel plans. The airline reservations showed departure times, seat assignments, and meal preferences that would satisfy any casual investigation into my supposed whereabouts. The physical staging required removing anything genuinely valuable from my apartment while leaving carefully placed items that would tempt my parents to plant their fabricated evidence nearby. I stored important documents, expensive electronics, and sentimental items at Mike's house, keeping only basic furniture and ordinary household items that wouldn't be damaged by their criminal activities. Installing the surveillance equipment took an entire weekend of careful preparation. Hidden cameras were positioned in every room, disguised as everyday objects that wouldn't attract attention. Audio recording equipment was concealed throughout the apartment, ensuring that every word spoken would be captured with courtroom-quality clarity. Motion sensors would alert my phone the moment anyone entered the apartment. The psychological preparation proved most difficult. I practiced maintaining normal communication patterns with my parents, sending them casual text messages about my work opportunity and expressing enthusiasm about the project. Their responses were unusually supportive and encouraging, which I now recognized as manipulation, designed to keep me calm and unsuspecting while they finalized their criminal preparations. Social media required careful attention to detail. I posted fake updates showing Seattle landmarks with carefully researched timestamps that matched the local time zone. Images downloaded from travel websites were edited to include subtle personal touches that would make them appear authentic to anyone checking my online activity. Every post was designed to reinforce the illusion that I was genuinely 3,000 miles away. Casey Richardson positioned external surveillance equipment to monitor my parents' activities during my supposed absence. Cameras were strategically placed to photograph their arrival at the storage unit, their approach to my apartment building, and their entry into my home. Additional recording equipment would capture their conversations before and after their criminal activities. The fake evidence placement required strategic thinking about what my parents would expect to find and where they would want to plant their fabricated materials. I left empty spaces in my medicine cabinet where psychiatric medications would logically be stored, cleared areas in my kitchen where alcohol bottles could be prominently displayed, and created obvious locations for planted suicide notes. Coordinating my actual location during their visit required precise timing and careful concealment. I planned to hide in my bedroom closet, which had been soundproofed and equipped with communication equipment that would allow me to coordinate with Casey while recording everything that happened in the apartment. The closet provided a clear view of the main living areas while keeping me completely hidden. The legal implications of my counter-surveillance operation required consultation with Casey's attorney contacts. Recording conversations in my own home was completely legal, and my parents would have no expectation of privacy while committing crimes on my property. Any evidence gathered would be admissible in court and would provide the foundation for criminal charges. The timeline coordination demanded split-second accuracy. I needed to ensure that my parents would act quickly once they believed I was safely out of state. But I also needed to give them enough confidence to proceed with their full criminal plan rather than aborting due to nervousness or suspicion. Creating believable communication from Seattle required research into the city's layout, weather patterns, and local businesses that I could reference in text messages and phone calls. I studied maps, read local news, and familiarized myself with restaurant names and neighborhood characteristics that would make my supposed presence there convincing. The emotional toll of preparing to witness my parents' ultimate betrayal was overwhelming. Knowing that I would soon watch them systematically destroy my life for money created a constant state of anxiety and grief. The anticipation of their criminal actions was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. Mike provided crucial technical support, ensuring that all recording equipment would function flawlessly when the critical moment arrived. Backup systems were installed to prevent any possibility of equipment failure that might compromise the evidence collection. Multiple storage devices would preserve the recordings even if my parents discovered and attempted to destroy some of the equipment. The apartment staging included subtle psychological triggers designed to make my parents feel comfortable and confident while committing their crimes. Lighting was adjusted to create a relaxed atmosphere, and background music was programmed to play at low volumes that would encourage conversation while not interfering with audio recording quality. Casey briefed me on the legal procedures that would follow the evidence collection, explaining how quickly law enforcement could respond and what charges would likely be filed based on the criminal activities we expected to document. Understanding the legal framework helped me prepare mentally for the confrontation that would end my parents' scheme and my relationship with them forever. The final preparations included creating emergency protocols in case my parents brought additional accomplices or weapons that could endanger my safety. Casey would monitor the situation remotely and could dispatch law enforcement immediately if the circumstances became threatening. My safety was the highest priority, even though exposing their crimes was essential. As the fake departure date approached, I felt a mixture of determination and profound sadness. I was about to witness my parents reveal their true character, confirming that their love for money exceeded their love for their son. The evidence I collected would protect me from their scheme, but would also destroy any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. The morning of my supposed departure, I texted my parents from the airport parking garage, sending them photos of my luggage and departure gate that I had prepared in advance. Their responses wished me luck on my business trip and reminded me to stay in touch, messages that now felt like calculated manipulation, designed to maintain their facade of parental concern. 2 days later, Casey's external surveillance cameras captured my parents' arrival at their storage unit at 9:45 in the morning. Richard drove their sedan, while Linda sat in the passenger seat, both appearing calm and confident as they prepared to execute their criminal plan. They spent 27 minutes loading boxes of fabricated evidence and equipment into their vehicle. From my concealed position in the bedroom closet, I watched through hidden cameras as they arrived at my apartment complex at 11:15, accompanied by 3 additional people who made my blood run cold. Dr. Margaret Thornton carried a large medical bag containing psychiatric evaluation forms and portable assessment equipment. Uncle Dale looked uncomfortable and nervous, clearly struggling with his role in their scheme. Marcus Webb brought professional photography equipment to document their fabricated evidence discoveries. The conversation I recorded as they approached my apartment door revealed the true scope of their evolved plan. They weren't simply planting evidence anymore, but intended to stage a complete intervention scenario that would justify my immediate involuntary commitment upon my return from the fake business trip. Dr. Thornton would conduct a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation on the spot, providing legal justification for emergency hospitalization. Linda used the emergency key I had given her years earlier for genuine emergencies, the irony of which wasn't lost on me as I watched her unlock my door to commit crimes against me. Their casual entry into my private space felt like a violation that went beyond the legal implications of breaking and entering. They were invading the sanctuary where I should have felt safest. Dr. Thornton immediately began setting up her portable psychiatric evaluation station on my dining room table, laying out pre-completed assessment forms that documented months of fictional therapy sessions. Her fraudulent materials included psychological test results showing severe depression, paranoid delusions, and potential danger to myself and others. Every document was carefully backdated to create a timeline of supposed mental health treatment. Richard coordinated the group's activities with military precision, assigning specific tasks to each accomplice while maintaining a careful timeline. His comfort level and organizational skills suggested that this wasn't their first coordinated criminal operation. The casual way he directed their illegal activities indicated extensive experience with similar schemes. Linda began her systematic placement of fabricated evidence throughout my apartment, starting with the bathroom medicine cabinet, where she positioned multiple prescription psychiatric medication bottles bearing my forged prescriptions, The bottles contained real medication she had somehow obtained, making the physical evidence more convincing than simple, empty containers. Uncle Dale's reluctance was clearly visible as he helped Richard arrange fake suicide notes in various locations around the apartment. His hands shook as he placed the documents, and his repeated questions about the necessity of their actions showed his internal conflict about participating in their scheme. Richard repeatedly assured him that they were saving me from myself and protecting the family from my alleged dangerous behavior. Marcus Webb documented every step of their evidence planting with professional photography equipment, creating a visual timeline that would supposedly show the discovery of my deteriorating mental state. His camera work was methodical and thorough, suggesting significant experience in creating fraudulent documentation for legal proceedings. The conversation I recorded revealed additional details about their criminal network that shocked me even more than their betrayal. Dr. Thornton discussed other families she had helped gain control over their relatives' assets, describing a systematic operation that had defrauded dozens of victims across multiple states. Her casual references to previous cases showed that inheritance fraud had become a routine business for her. Linda's commentary during the evidence planting exposed her complete lack of empathy or remorse about destroying my life. She expressed excitement about the European vacation she planned to take with my inheritance money and discussed redecorating her house with expensive furniture purchased using funds stolen from my grandfather's legacy. Her callousness was more painful than I had anticipated. Richard's discussion of his gambling debts revealed the dangerous time pressure driving their scheme. His creditors had given him a final deadline of the following Friday to produce the money he owed, or they would begin collecting through violence. The urgency explained why they had accelerated their timeline and were taking greater risks to complete their plan. Dr. Thornton explained her fraudulent psychiatric evaluation strategy in detail, describing how she would testify that I had been her patient for 6 months and had exhibited increasingly dangerous behavior, including threats against my family and expressions of suicidal ideation. Her prepared testimony included specific incidents that never happened but sounded clinically convincing. The group spent over 3 hours in my apartment, their confidence growing as they believed their plan was proceeding perfectly. They discussed logistics for my involuntary commitment, including which hospital would be most cooperative and how quickly they could gain power of attorney once I was declared incompetent. Their casualness about destroying my freedom was breathtaking. Marcus Webb revealed additional surveillance he had conducted beyond simple photography, including installation of tracking devices on my car and monitoring equipment that had captured my private conversations. His technical capabilities were more extensive than I had realized, and his willingness to use them for criminal purposes showed the professional nature of their operation. Uncle Dale's questions about the legal implications of their actions prompted Richard to reveal their connection with corrupt court clerk Nancy Phillips, who would ensure that the competency hearing proceeded with minimal oversight or opportunity for me to mount an effective defense. The judicial corruption added another layer to their comprehensive scheme. Linda's placement of alcohol bottles throughout my apartment was accompanied by commentary about how she had researched the specific brands and quantities that would suggest the most serious drinking problem. Her attention to detail in fabricating evidence of my supposed alcoholism showed the calculated nature of every aspect of their deception. The fake suicide notes that Uncle Dale reluctantly positioned around my apartment contained handwriting that Linda had practiced copying for weeks. She had analyzed samples of my writing from old letters and birthday cards, perfecting my signature and writing style to create convincing evidence of suicidal ideation that had never existed. Dr. Thornton's discussion of her medical license issues revealed that she had lost her credentials in Colorado for previous incidents of falsifying patient records for financial gain. Her willingness to continue practicing medicine illegally and creating fraudulent evaluations showed a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond my case. Richard's coordination with his gambling associates revealed that some of the money he owed was to people connected to organized crime, making his desperation even more understandable, while not excusing his willingness to destroy his son's life. The dangerous nature of his creditors explained why he was willing to take such extreme risks to access my inheritance. The recording equipment captured every detail of their criminal conspiracy, including discussions of how they would divide my grandfather's money, which assets they would liquidate first, and how they would avoid taxation on their sudden windfall. Their financial planning based on stolen inheritance money was as detailed as their evidence fabrication. As they prepared to leave my apartment, their satisfaction with their completed criminal work was evident in their relaxed conversation and expressions of mutual congratulation. They believed they had successfully set the trap that would allow them to steal everything my grandfather had worked his entire life to accumulate and leave to me. The moment Richard expressed satisfaction with their completed evidence planting, I stepped out of my bedroom closet with my phone recording having captured every word and action of their 3-hour criminal conspiracy. The shock on their faces was immediate and complete as they realized they had been trapped in the act of committing multiple felonies against their own son. Linda dropped the bag containing unused psychiatric medications, the bottles scattering across my living room floor, as her face drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed silently, unable to form words, as the reality of their situation became clear. The woman who had birthed me and raised me stood frozen, caught destroying my life for money. Richard lunged toward me, attempting to grab my phone and delete the evidence, but I stepped back and calmly announced that every moment of their criminal activity had been recorded by hidden cameras and professional-grade audio equipment positioned throughout the apartment. His desperation was palpable as he realized that their carefully planned scheme had become their own trap. Dr. Thornton bolted toward the apartment door, but I blocked her exit while simultaneously dialing 911 to report a break-in and fraud in progress. Her medical bag containing fraudulent psychiatric evaluation materials fell open, spilling fabricated assessment forms and forged prescriptions across the floor. The evidence of her professional misconduct was now scattered and undeniable. Uncle Dale collapsed into my armchair, his face buried in his hands, as he comprehended that he had been manipulated into participating in a sophisticated criminal conspiracy against his own nephew. His emotional breakdown was immediate and genuine, showing that his participation had been based on lies my parents told him about my supposed mental instability and dangerous behavior. Marcus Webb frantically attempted to delete photographs from his camera equipment, but Casey Richardson's voice came through my hidden communication system, informing him that his 3 weeks of illegal surveillance had been documented by counter-surveillance equipment. His professional photography gear contained evidence of stalking, trespassing, and invasion of privacy that would support multiple criminal charges. The chaos in my apartment was surreal, as 5 people who had conspired to destroy my life suddenly realized they had walked into a perfectly planned trap. I revealed the extent of my counter-surveillance operation, showing them live footage from hidden cameras positioned throughout the room, and explaining that their entire conversation about stealing my inheritance had been recorded in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Casey's external surveillance footage appeared on my laptop screen, showing my parents' arrival at the storage unit, their loading of criminal evidence, and their approach to my apartment building. Every movement had been documented from multiple angles, creating an irrefutable timeline of their premeditated criminal activities. Linda became hysterical, screaming that I had violated their privacy and demanding that I delete all recordings, but I calmly explained that they were in my apartment without permission and had forfeited any expectation of privacy while committing crimes. Her threats and demands only provided additional evidence of her criminal intent and lack of remorse. Richard alternated between desperate threats and pathetic pleas, trying to convince me that their scheme was motivated by genuine concern for my welfare. and that I had misunderstood their intentions. His lies became increasingly frantic as he realized that their recorded conversations had already proven the financial motivation behind their elaborate deception. Dr. Thornton's professional facade completely crumbled as she admitted that Linda had paid her $50,000 to create false psychiatric records and that she had lost her medical license in Colorado for similar fraudulent activities. Her confession on camera provided crucial evidence that the psychiatric evaluation was completely fabricated and that she had been operating illegally. Uncle Dale's emotional breakdown revealed the extent of my parents' psychological manipulation of family members. Through tears, he explained that Richard and Linda had convinced him that I had threatened to report his tax evasion to the IRS and that I was becoming dangerous and unpredictable. His genuine remorse showed that his participation was based on lies designed to make him fear me. I confronted each conspirator individually while maintaining my recording, asking specific questions that forced them to admit their criminal actions on camera. Linda's responses ranged from defensive justifications to angry outbursts that further incriminated her, while Richard's attempts to minimize their crimes only highlighted the calculated nature of their scheme. Marcus Webb attempted to claim he was an unwitting participant in their operation, but Casey's documentation of his extensive surveillance activities proved his knowing participation in criminal conspiracy. His attempts to delete evidence while being recorded provided additional charges of obstruction of justice that would complicate his legal situation. The apartment door opened as police officers Jennifer Martinez and David Chen responded to my 911 call, finding 5 people surrounded by planted evidence and fabricated documents. The officers immediately separated everyone for individual questioning while I provided them with copies of my recordings and comprehensive documentation of the criminal conspiracy. Officer Martinez expressed shock at the sophistication of the scheme and the volume of evidence I had gathered, noting that inheritance fraud cases rarely involved such extensive documentation of premeditated criminal activity. Her partner began photographing the planted evidence and collecting the fabricated documents for forensic analysis. Linda's hysteria escalated as she realized that law enforcement was treating her as a criminal rather than a concerned mother, and her demands for special consideration based on our family relationship were ignored by officers who had witnessed the recorded evidence of her crimes. Richard's attempts to charm the police officers failed completely when they heard audio of his callous discussions about stealing my inheritance. Dr. Thornton's requests for legal representation revealed her understanding that she faced serious criminal charges beyond simple fraud, including practicing medicine without a license, falsifying medical records, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping through forced psychiatric commitment. Her illegal medical practice had been exposed, along with her participation in inheritance fraud. Uncle Dale's cooperation with law enforcement began immediately as he realized the extent of his manipulation and sought to minimize his legal exposure through honest testimony about my parents' lies and coercion. His emotional state and genuine remorse made him a valuable witness against the primary conspirators. The evidence collection process took over 2 hours as officers documented every piece of planted material, every fabricated document, and every item of surveillance equipment used in the elaborate scheme. My recordings provided context for each piece of physical evidence, creating a comprehensive case file that would support multiple felony charges. Marcus Webb's camera equipment contained photographs of not just me, but several other potential victims, suggesting that inheritance fraud was his regular business rather than an isolated criminal incident. His professional surveillance gear and methods indicated experience with similar schemes targeting vulnerable families. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' own words had become the strongest evidence against them. Their recorded conversations about dividing my inheritance money, their casual discussions about destroying my life, and their detailed planning of criminal activities provided prosecutors with everything needed to secure convictions. Casey arrived at the apartment as officers completed their initial evidence collection bringing additional documentation of my parents' criminal history and connections to other fraudulent activities. Her investigation had uncovered a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond their scheme against me. The transformation from victim to prosecutor felt surreal as I watched my parents being read their rights and processed as criminals. The people who had taught me about honesty and integrity were now facing serious felony charges for elaborate fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Their own actions had destroyed our family more thoroughly than any external threat ever could. Detective Sarah Walsh arrived within an hour to take over the investigation, and her first questions about Richard's identity triggered memories of an unsolved case from 3 years earlier. She immediately recognized his name in connection with suspicious financial activities surrounding Linda's elderly Aunt Margaret, who had died under questionable circumstances after suddenly changing her will to benefit Richard and Linda instead of her original beneficiaries. The reopening of Aunt Margaret's case revealed that my parents had been running inheritance scams for nearly a decade, using similar tactics of forged medical records, fabricated mental incompetency claims, and corrupt medical professionals to steal money from vulnerable elderly relatives across multiple states. Detective Walsh's investigation uncovered at least 6 other victims who had been systematically defrauded by my parents' sophisticated criminal operation. The revelation that my grandfather's death might not have been natural causes hit me like a physical blow. Detective Walsh explained that the patterns surrounding his final illness matched those seen in other cases where elderly victims had been given substances that accelerated existing health conditions. The possibility that my parents had murdered my grandfather to expedite their inheritance scheme added a horrifying new dimension to their crimes. Dr. Thornton's cooperation with federal investigators exposed a nationwide network of corrupt medical professionals who specialized in providing fraudulent psychiatric evaluations for families seeking to gain improper control over their relatives' assets. Her detailed testimony revealed a conspiracy that had defrauded hundreds of families out of millions of dollars in inheritance money, leading to FBI involvement due to the interstate nature of the crimes. Uncle Dale's emotional breakdown in the police interview room led to additional revelations about the family's criminal history that I had never suspected. Through tears and obvious guilt, he admitted that Richard had forced him to help drain our grandmother's bank account 2 years earlier by claiming she was developing dementia and couldn't manage her finances responsibly. The truth about our grandmother's death became clear as Dale's confession unfolded. She had died shortly after they gained control of her money, and Dale had been carrying guilt about her sudden deterioration ever since. He now realized that her rapid decline might have been artificially induced to prevent her from discovering their theft of her life savings. Marcus Webb's confession revealed that he specialized in providing surveillance and documentation services for inheritance fraud schemes and had been working with Richard and Linda for over 2 years. His camera equipment contained evidence of similar operations targeting multiple elderly family members, showing that I wasn't their only intended victim, but part of a systematic criminal enterprise. The corrupt court clerk Nancy Phillips was arrested at her courthouse office after Detective Walsh discovered evidence of her involvement in expediting fraudulent competency hearings for numerous families over the past 3 years. Her computer files revealed dozens of cases where she had manipulated court schedules and paperwork to help relatives gain improper control over elderly family members' assets. Phillips' cooperation with investigators exposed an entire judicial corruption ring operating across 3 counties with multiple court employees accepting bribes to facilitate inheritance fraud cases. Her detailed records provided evidence of systemic corruption that would lead to the overturning of numerous questionable competency rulings and the reopening of suspicious cases. The financial investigation into my parents' criminal activities revealed the staggering scope of their theft from multiple family members over nearly 10 years. Richard and Linda had stolen over $800,000 from various elderly relatives, using the money to fund Richard's gambling addiction and Linda's compulsive shopping while maintaining appearances of financial stability. Their current desperate situation became clear as forensic accountants traced their spending patterns and debt accumulation. They had already borrowed over $400,000 in anticipated inheritance money from my estate, taking out loans and credit advances against the windfall they expected to receive after having me declared incompetent. Their financial house of cards was collapsing regardless of whether their scheme succeeded. I confronted my parents in the police station interview room, demanding answers about their other victims and the truth about my grandfather's death. Linda's breakdown was complete, as she admitted they had been systematically targeting elderly family members for years, but she maintained they had only accelerated natural deaths and never directly murdered anyone. Richard remained defiant even in custody, arguing that they deserved the inheritance money because they had taken care of elderly relatives and had financial needs that justified their actions. His complete lack of remorse or understanding of the harm they had caused was perhaps more shocking than the crimes themselves. The discovery of my grandfather's detailed journals provided the most devastating evidence against my parents' claims of deserving his money. His handwritten entries expressed deep concerns about Richard's gambling problems and Linda's financial irresponsibility, specifically documenting his intention to leave everything to me to protect his life's work from their destructive behavior. My grandfather's journals revealed that he had suspected their criminal intentions and had been documenting suspicious conversations and behaviors for months before his death. His final entries expressed fear about their increasing pressure for him to change his will and their angry reactions when he refused to alter his inheritance plans. Extended family members who had been manipulated into supporting the competency hearing learned the truth about my parents' lies and expressed profound shock and guilt about being deceived. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had believed fabricated stories about my mental health apologized extensively and offered to testify against Richard and Linda in court. The family gathering called to address the crisis was unlike anything in our history, with relatives who had been turned against each other by my parents' lies, finally understanding the systematic manipulation they had endured. Everyone had been lied to about someone else creating divisions that had served my parents' criminal purposes perfectly. My cousin Jennifer revealed that Linda had told her I threatened suicide during a phone call that never happened, while my Uncle Robert had been convinced that I was drinking heavily and making wild accusations against the family. Each lie had been carefully crafted to isolate potential allies and make their fabricated incompetency case more believable. The psychological evaluation I underwent to document my actual mental state provided a stark contrast to Dr. Thornton's fraudulent assessment. Licensed psychiatrist Dr. Amanda Foster found no evidence of mental illness, substance abuse, or psychological instability, describing me as a psychologically healthy individual dealing appropriately with family trauma and betrayal. Dr. Foster's professional opinion that my parents' systematic abuse and betrayal constituted severe psychological trauma helped me understand that my emotional responses to their criminal activities were completely normal reactions to extraordinary circumstances. Her validation of my mental health became crucial evidence against their fabricated incompetency claims. The media attention surrounding the case brought additional victims forward, including elderly individuals from other states who had been defrauded by similar schemes involving fake medical evaluations and corrupt court officials. My parents' arrest became the catalyst for exposing a much larger criminal network that had operated undetected for years. The federal charges that resulted from the expanded investigation carried sentences of 15 to 20 years in prison for each count of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. With multiple victims across several states, Richard and Linda faced the possibility of spending the rest of their lives in federal prison for their systematic criminal activities. The civil asset forfeiture proceedings froze all of my parents' assets as potential proceeds from criminal activity, including their house cars and personal belongings purchased with stolen money. The government's seizure of their property provided some compensation for their victims while ensuring they couldn't benefit financially from their crimes. The revelation that their criminal network had stolen over $3 million from elderly victims across 6 states made national news and prompted congressional hearings about the need for stronger protections against inheritance fraud. My case became the foundation for new federal legislation protecting elderly Americans from financial abuse by family members. 6 months after my parents' arrest, I received an unexpected call from my grandfather's original lawyer, James Morrison, whose voice trembled with emotion as he revealed information that would provide final closure to the nightmare my family had endured. Morrison explained that my grandfather had suspected Richard and Linda would attempt to steal my inheritance and had left detailed instructions with his law firm about exposing their potential fraud. The secret recording my grandfather had made captured Richard and Linda discussing their inheritance scheme in his hospital room just hours after his funeral, including their excitement about accessing my money and their detailed plans for having me declared mentally incompetent. Morrison had been reluctant to believe my grandfather's warnings about his own son and daughter-in-law, but my evidence had proven that every suspicion was completely accurate. Morrison's emotional apology for nearly facilitating their fraud helped me understand that my grandfather's wisdom had extended beyond his life providing protection even after his death. The elderly lawyer had genuinely believed that Richard and Linda were concerned about my welfare, making him another victim of their sophisticated manipulation and lies. The federal trial proceedings moved swiftly due to the overwhelming evidence gathered during my counter-surveillance operation and the subsequent investigation. Richard was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for elder abuse mail fraud, identity theft conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping through forced psychiatric commitment across multiple states and jurisdictions. Linda received 15 years in federal prison for her central role in the criminal conspiracy, including the systematic drugging of my food forgery of medical records and manipulation of family members to support their fraudulent competency claims. Her complete lack of remorse during sentencing convinced the judge that she posed a continuing threat to elderly family members. Dr. Margaret Thornton, whose real name was revealed to be Dr. Margaret Walsh, lost all remaining medical certifications and received 8 years in federal prison for medical fraud practicing without a license and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Her cooperation with federal investigators helped expose the nationwide network of corrupt medical professionals, but couldn't fully mitigate her extensive criminal activities. Marcus Webb's sentencing to 6 years in federal prison reflected his cooperation with authorities in exposing other inheritance fraud schemes he had facilitated over the past 5 years. His professional surveillance equipment and detailed records helped investigators identify and prosecute numerous other criminals who had targeted vulnerable, elderly victims. Nancy Phillips, the corrupt court clerk, received 4 years in federal prison and permanent prohibition from any government employment after her role in expediting fraudulent competency hearings was fully documented. Her cooperation led to the overturning of 17 questionable competency rulings and the prosecution of other court employees who had accepted bribes. Uncle Dale's sentence of 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service reflected his manipulation by my parents and his genuine cooperation with investigators. His emotional testimony during their trial helped the jury understand how systematically Richard and Linda had deceived family members to advance their criminal scheme. The federal investigation ultimately recovered over $2 million in stolen inheritance money from various victims, with my case serving as the catalyst for exposing the entire criminal network. The prosecution of 43 individuals across 6 states represented one of the largest inheritance fraud operations ever uncovered by federal authorities. My decision to undergo counseling with Dr. Amanda Foster proved invaluable in processing the trauma of my parents' betrayal and learning healthy strategies for rebuilding my life after such profound family dysfunction. Her professional guidance helped me understand that my parents' criminal behavior reflected their character defects rather than any failure on my part as their son. The therapy process taught me to recognize manipulation tactics and establish healthy boundaries in future relationship skills that became essential as I navigated the complicated emotions surrounding my parents' imprisonment and the destruction of my childhood family structure. Dr. Foster's support helped me distinguish between grief for my lost family and inappropriate guilt about their criminal choices. Using my inheritance responsibly became my way of honoring my grandfather's memory and transforming my traumatic experience into meaningful assistance for other vulnerable people. I established the Robert Henderson Foundation for Elder Protection, named after my grandfather, to provide legal assistance counseling services and education programs preventing financial abuse of elderly Americans by family members. The Foundation's programs included legal representation for elderly victims of inheritance fraud, educational workshops about protecting assets from unscrupulous relatives, and support groups for families dealing with the aftermath of financial elder abuse. My personal experience with family betrayal gave the Foundation credibility and helped other victims understand they weren't alone in facing such devastating circumstances. Extended family relationships gradually healed as relatives understood the full extent of Richard and Linda's manipulation and systematic lies that had turned family members against each other for years. Cousins who had initially believed my parents' fabricated stories about my mental health worked to rebuild trust and create genuine connections based on honesty rather than deception. Family gatherings became authentic celebrations of our shared heritage, rather than opportunities for Richard and Linda to gather intelligence for their criminal schemes. The absence of their manipulation allowed genuine relationships to develop between relatives who had been kept suspicious and distant from each other through carefully orchestrated lies and manufactured conflicts. My romantic relationship with Jennifer Walsh, a victim advocate who had worked on my case, developed gradually based on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping families affected by criminal betrayal. Jennifer's professional experience with family fraud cases gave her unique insight into the psychological impact of parental betrayal and the challenges of rebuilding trust after such profound deception. Jennifer's understanding of criminal psychology helped me process my parents' behavior without personalizing their choices or accepting responsibility for their criminal decisions. Her professional perspective provided valuable context for my experience, while her personal support helped me envision a future built on healthy relationships and authentic connections. The annual visit to my grandfather's grave became a meaningful tradition where I shared updates about the Foundation's work and the positive impact his inheritance was having on protecting other elderly Americans from family exploitation. These visits provided emotional connection with his memory and reinforced my commitment to using his legacy responsibly. Standing at his graveside, I expressed gratitude for his wisdom in anticipating my parents' criminal intentions and his careful planning that ultimately protected not only my inheritance, but also exposed a criminal network that had harmed many families. His foresight had saved countless future victims from experiencing the betrayal and devastation I had endured. The Foundation's success in helping over 200 families during its first year of operation demonstrated that positive change could emerge from even the most painful personal experiences. Each family we helped reinforced my understanding that my parents' betrayal, while devastating, had equipped me with unique insight into inheritance fraud that could benefit other vulnerable people. My final reflection on the experience emphasized the importance of courage in confronting family dysfunction, the necessity of protecting vulnerable people from exploitation, and the possibility of transforming personal trauma into meaningful service to others. The journey from victim to advocate had been difficult, but ultimately rewarding, providing purpose and healing through helping other families avoid similar devastation. The story of my parents' betrayal and the justice that followed became a powerful reminder that truth ultimately prevails over deception, that courage to fight back against injustice can protect others from harm, and that even the most profound family betrayals can be transformed into forces for positive change in the world. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that my grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the money he left me, but the example he set of standing up for what's right and protecting the people you love. He taught me that family means more than blood relations, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop someone from harming others, even when that someone is your own parent. The foundation continues to grow, and every family we help reminds me that my painful experience had a purpose beyond my own healing. My parents chose money over family, but I chose to use that same money to protect families from the kind of destruction they tried to cause. In the end, my grandfather's legacy lives on through the lives we touch and the harm we prevent. What would you do if you discovered your own family was planning to betray you for money? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in facing difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to stand up for what's right, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do.